Welcome to Understanding Poetry 2020, 2021. Mr. A with you once again, joined by my beautiful and loquacious sidekick, the
Good
lovely
morning,
and talented
everybody.
Mrs. A.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hey, we are updating Center for Lit Online Academy's technology today. And you will notice that Mrs. A is not burdened by a giant microphone right in her face.
Yay!
She's using a lapel mic. The sound might be a little different than usual, but I'd like a quick chat from you guys to let me know whether you can hear her okay. And in order for us to
Can
do
you
that, she's
hear
going to
me
have to
okay? I know I
talk.
have to. Well, that shouldn't be a problem. You guys know I'm very loquacious, as Mr. Ray said. Can you hear me all right this morning? Excellent.
Good to know it.
Very
Good to know it.
glad.
Well, let me very quickly get right into the topic for today. It's understanding poetry. And today, our topic is metaphors and symbols. And we have a lot to get through, and Mrs. A is chomping at the bit. So I'm going to turn it over to her. After 10 seconds of introduction, I would like to say to you all, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
We are glad to be with you in this holiday season. And I hope after today's class that you go on and have a wonderful holiday. And also, very quickly, we are going to be putting a recording up in the Google Classroom, just like we always do. So the discussion posts and the regular additional activities will be scheduled for you as they usually are. Don't forget, however, that we are taking a 2-week break for the Christmas holiday. And so that will impinge upon your due dates. Everything that was going to be due during the 2-week break will be due after it. So you get to take 2 weeks off as well. Um, yes, Key, I know I didn't mention the Red, Red Rose poem until yesterday. I'm sorry about that. It didn't appear in our syllabus. So don't worry. You haven't failed by not reading the Red, Red
No,
Rose
no
poem.
worries.
Mrs. A will go slowly.
Yes, we'll read it in class today.
Okay, good. Let's go ahead and get started. Mrs. A, metaphors and symbols. What in the world?
What in the world? Well, the idea of a metaphor, the definition of a metaphor, should already be familiar to you. We've mentioned it in passing a couple of times already this year, and we've been noticing the metaphors and similes as we've read our previous poems. But I want to spend a little time thinking about the idea of metaphor and simile and symbolism today. So let's just review the definition of metaphor before we get into the class, since we're going to be basically focusing on metaphor all day long. It's good for you to know what it is. So a metaphor. Metaphor is the poetic drama of comparisons and contrasts. The poetic drama of comparisons and contrasts.
I like that. Poetic drama.
It is. There's a lot of drama in metaphor if the metaphor is any good, right? Metaphor actually comes from Greek words, meta, M-E-T-A, meta, meaning over or across, and pheron, pronounced with the accent on the second syllable, but it's spelled P-H-E-R-E-I-N, pheron. I think I'm actually pronouncing it wrong because I don't speak Greek, but I believe it's
Greek.
pheron.
It doesn't really matter.
Doesn't really matter. But the idea is meta meaning over, across, and pheron meaning to carry or to bear. So a metaphor carries or bears something from one place across to another. It's a kind of association, right? It transfers or carries over the meaning of a word or an idea to another word through comparison or juxtaposition. Metaphor. Okay, so a metaphor is the identification of one thing with or by another unlike thing. We're looking at unlike things that have some similarity to each other, but perhaps not an immediately apparent similarity. All right, so we're going to be looking at metaphor and simile today. And when metaphors and similes are used over and over again and become readily recognizable, they rise to the status of symbol, okay? So we're going to look at some common symbols today as well that poets like to use. Okay, well, let's start with Robert Burns. He declared, "Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June." Let's just read that poem. Mr. A, will you do that for me?
Oh, with pleasure. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. So fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till a' the seas gang dry. Till a' the seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun, I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. And fare thee weel, my only love, and fare thee weel a while, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile.
Though it were 10,000 miles. I think there's a song that was written on the basis of this poem back in with Zips, right? I would walk 10,000 miles. Isn't that? You think
It
that was
is,
based
but
on
you're
this?
dating yourself.
I'm dating myself a
Yeah.
little bit.
Move
Maybe
on.
you guys know. Anyway, moving on. Okay. So Robert Burns, he declares here his love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. So he's using this comparative like to make his association, which is not metaphor, but simile. Simile is very much like, if I can say like, the metaphor, right? Just to make the comparison between the two. They're similar in that they convey the same kind of association that a metaphor conveys, but because the poet inserts the words like or as in the juxtaposition of the two words, in the comparison itself ends up being somewhat weaker, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this, it isn't this, but it's like this, he says, okay? All right. In this particular poem, we get the simile, right? His love is like a red, red rose. His love is like a melody. What else does he say here? These are the two immediate associations. His love is like a rose. What does that mean? What does that impart about his love? Well, what does a rose offer? What could he possibly mean? That his love is like a red, red rose. Not just a red rose, a red, red rose, right?
What about the red?
He's emphasizing the red.
The point of a simile, right, is to help you to import the characteristics of the thing being used as the simile into your understanding of the thing being described, right?
Yes, good, Michaela. Red represents passion.
Passion.
And it's especially red. It's a red, red rose. So it's very passionate love, right? And he says that it's like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. So melody in tune. What are we to take from that? A melody in tune is what? Well, it's sweet, it's pleasing, right? It's harmonious, it reverberates, it carries, right? It's lovely. All of these kinds of things were to apply to an understanding of the kind of love that he has for this lass, this bonny lass.
Bonny lass.
So fair art thou. So meaning you are as fair as this is. So fair art thou, my bonny lass. And so deep in love am I. I am deep in love as this, right? So two more comparisons. And I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas go dry. Till all the seas go dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run.
It's gang dry, not go dry.
Yeah, it's Scottish.
It's Scottish.
Brogue, right? And fare thee well, my only love, and fare thee well a while, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile, which is not hard to believe if his love is, as he says it is, this passionate, right? Doesn't matter how far she is away or how far away he goes, he'll come back, not to worry. All right.
There's another metaphor in here.
There is another metaphor. Go ahead.
There's this thing about the sands of life at the end of the third stanza.
Yeah, what's he mean there, Mr. A?
Well, it's a comparison, right? It's an image. It calls up a picture of an hourglass, does it?
It does.
That life running through an hourglass as if it were sand. And so the life is being compared to the sands of an hourglass. Is being compared to something that's running out or going away or temporal, right? That has an end.
Yeah. It's an image of the passage of time.
The passage of time, yeah.
The fleetness of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so you get the concept here about the simile. Let's take a look at Robert Frost's A Patch of Old Snow. I really like this particular one, especially come February. I think about this a lot. There's a patch of old snow in a corner that I should have guessed was a blown away paper the rain had brought to rest. It's speckled with grime as if small print overspread it. The news of a day I've forgotten if I ever read it. A patch of old snow. What have we got here in terms of comparisons? What's being compared in this particular poem? There's a patch of old snow in a corner that I should have guessed was a blown away paper the rain had brought to rest. So snow, a patch of snow being compared to
Everybody's
a
saying
paper.
a newspaper.
What kind of a paper? Yeah, a newspaper. Speckled with grime as if small print overspread it. So we're getting the idea of a newspaper, right? The news of a day I've forgotten if I ever read it. Okay, so we've got a patch of old snow compared to this newspaper. What are we to understand about the snow? What's he doing with this comparison here? Why does he make the comparison? Why is the comparison apt, if it is? Snow compared to a newspaper. It's forgotten. It's forgotten. What's forgotten? What's forgotten here?
The news of a day I've forgotten. So that refers to the past somehow, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's meditating on the nature of time and the way that we forget things that recently occurred. In the same way that, you would discover an old newspaper wadded up in an alley, right? And it's news of a day that was forgotten. He compares that to an old patch of snow. There isn't any other snow left, just this one little patch, and it's grimy, right? And it's way yesterday. It's past and forgotten already, right? Why does he make this comparison? What kind of a tone do you hear in this comparison? Snow's been there for a while. The dirt on it tells the story of days that have already happened and possibly have something to impart to the poet. Maybe, if so, what? That's my question. What does he see in this metaphor? What are we to take from this comparison? We concede the likeness, but why do we concede the likeness? Is it just its appearance? What does it signify?
There's a lot of negative. There's a negative tone.
Like he says it kind of sounds sad. Can't even remember if he read the piece of paper. Yes.
Blown away, grime, forgotten.
Okay, so if we were to ask our Socratic questions, we know that the immediate subject matter of the poem is this patch of old snow. It's the literal subject matter. And this comparison he makes, is it a simile or a metaphor?
What do you think, guys? Simile or metaphor?
It's a metaphor, right? No like or as here. He said, patch of old snow, I should have guessed, was a blown away paper the rain had brought to rest. Yeah. So the snow is the patch of old paper in this sense. Why is it sad? What's so sad about an old newspaper in the corner? A patch of old snow in the corner. Where does this wistful, retrospective, resigned tone Mr. A's noted here come from? Yes, Michaela. So literally it's about this patch of old snow, but figuratively it's about lost time or unobserved time.
Yeah,
right?
The last line, if I ever read it, if I was even paying attention in the first place, I've forgotten.
Yeah, this is a poem about man's lack of mindfulness. If we can use one of today's words retrospectively, right? We're always on about mindfulness these days, being in the moment and all of that sort of thing. This really meditates on the nature of reality, which is that we aren't often in the moment. We don't often notice the things going on around us. We're too busy living to notice, and then it's past, and we kind of look back and we're not even sure we remember it, right? This is what he's talking about here. Okay, and how does he communicate that big idea? With an image that he creates with a metaphor. Old snow, like an old newspaper. Pretty apt. Okay, Longfellow, who we looked at recently as well, he really loved metaphors. He used metaphors and similes all the time. If you've ever read Paul Revere's Ride, you'll recognize this excerpt. He says, beneath in the churchyard lay the dead in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, all is well, all is well. And just give you a little context for those of you that have not read Paul Revere's Ride, or The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. This figures, basically the entire narrative poem tells the story of the eve of the Revolutionary War for Independence in the United States of America. So when Paul Revere and his friend on the other side of the river are communicating about the movement they see in the ships to discover whether they should ride and spread the alarm to the Minutemen, who were waiting to hear that the Minutemen were coming and that they needed to arm themselves for battle, right? And this particular passage has Revere's friend up in a belfry tower at about midnight, looking for the signal lamp that Paul Revere has told him that he will hold up, one if by land, two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be ready to ride and spread the alarm to every Middlesex village and farm for the Minutemen to be up and to arms, he says, right? Well, he's up there waiting, and he says this, he's looking at the scene before him. He says, beneath in the churchyard lay the dead in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, all is well. Okay, so what is the comparison that he's making here? What is the literal subject matter of the poem in this particular verse? What does he hold up literally to your mind's eye?
He's comparing the night wind to a sentinel.
Yes. Look at the first couple of lines. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead in their night encampment on the hill. He sets the scene for us there. And what is the literal scene? What's he looking at?
What's a churchyard, for example?
A cemetery, a cemetery right. Outside of a church, right? He's looking at this churchyard and he's thinking about the dead that are there. And what does he compare them to? The dead in the cemetery.
Not sentinels.
Not sentinels. Where are they? He says, I see the churchyard, and the churchyard, I'm going to compare that to a night encampment on a hill. What's a night encampment?
Sarah Beth, you're right. It's an army.
It's an army camp, right? So he's considering the churchyard of dead, those buried there, like an army, right, on a hillside. And they're wrapped in silence so deep and still. Wow, this is kind of an outrageous metaphor, isn't it? You're forced to conceive the likeness of the dead buried in that cemetery and the sleeping men bunking down, right, in an army, and the stillness of the night that they're wrapped in. And it's so quiet that he could hear like a sentinel's tread. What's a sentinel? A watchman, right? Creeping along from tent to tent, right? And who's he comparing that sentinel to? You said earlier.
The wind.
The night wind. Yeah, the night wind is like a sentinel. The churchyard is like an army bunked down for the night. And the night wind is like a sentinel whispering, all is well, right? Yeah. What's the significance of this particular metaphor?
Why an army, for example?
Why would he compare the dead with an army? In the night wind with a watchman. Watching for what? Why is the army encamped?
What do armies do?
The army's about to be summoned. Yeah. It's a very portentous image, isn't it?
There's a lot of
the larger context from which I extracted this particular passage, right? This is the midnight ride of Paul Revere. This is about the Minutemen coming up into arms, right? And the fact that he's envisioning the dead buried there. Think about that for a minute. The significance of a cemetery in the American colonies in this particular period of time. Why might that add gravity to the subject at hand? Think about this for a minute. I know I'm asking you to do something hard here because I haven't given you the entire poem, but yes, the dead fought for the same cause. Well, the dead haven't fought, but yes, you're exactly right in a sense, because those people that are laying there dead were the ones who worked, who lived and died to carve this land out, this new world out that this man and the Minutemen were about to fight to protect. Their way of life, right? Their livelihoods, all of those things were being threatened by the British. And so to impart these people keeping watch, right, like they were an army, imparts more gravity to the moment, right? Nice. Yes, that's exactly right, Sarah Beth.
Yeah, this is definitely, the poem as a whole is something of a call to arms, right? A call to to rise up as patriots and do something. And the use of the military metaphor here, using the dead, the ancestors, as soldiers, is supposed to stir the blood and stir the heart to
To
action.
patriotism.
Yeah,
Why,
right.
you got to consider those who created this world.
They were like army or like soldiers too.
Exactly. And you owe something to them.
Yeah.
To their memory, right? It's like that. Okay. Let's see. Notice too that in this particular passage, he uses this literary device personification in order to create this image as well, right? He's personifying the night wind, whispering all is well. So that can enter into metaphorical comparisons as well, this element of personification. All right. I think the Longfellow example is really a good one because he doesn't use the metaphor and then drop it like Burns did in his use of similes in the first poem we read. Instead, he draws the metaphor out to really amplify the picture and the idea that he's hoping it will carry to his readers. So when a poet develops a metaphor and plays on it in all of its parts, he creates what we call an extended metaphor. And often when a poet engages in extended comparisons like this, he creates what poets call conceits, or particularly metaphysical conceits, because the 17th century metaphysical poets did this all the time. They stretched their comparisons, they pressed them to such extremes that you were kind of forced to concede the likeness, even as the dissimilarity of the two things made you go like that.
Isn't it true that conceit in the 17th century sense of the word is a rough synonym for metaphor?
Yes,
yeah,
it is. But the men who were using this word to term this kind of comparison were using the term very negatively. It had negative connotations. So I think they were playing on that word themselves because they thought that it was an arrogant kind of comparison.
Right.
It was absurd. It was an absurd comparison, even though they had to concede that it was apt. Okay. So John Donne was one of the 17th century metaphysical poets, the father of metaphysical poetry. And I have here his Batter My Heart, Three-Personed God, which I don't think we've read that yet this year in this class. Have we? Maybe we have.
I don't know. We've taught it a couple of times in other classes.
I've taught it this year a couple of times in my 17th century. Well, when we cover the 17th century poets in British Lit, we cover this as well. So forgive me if this is repetitious, but you can never read a John Donne poem too many times. So let's read Batter My Heart, Three-Personed God. Mr. A, you want to read?
Sure. Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, o'erthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town to another, do labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me.
All right, Batter My Heart, Three-Personed God. Before we even begin to look at the poem itself, what kind of a poem are we looking at here?
Any thoughts?
It's a sonnet. Good. I'm glad you're paying attention.
Very good.
They tell you right at the outset, this is a holy sonnet. Okay, two things you learn. One, that this form, the form of the poem, is a sonnet. And the second is that it's a holy sonnet. What does he mean, a holy sonnet? Donne wrote multiple holy sonnets. Yes, one pertaining to the things of God.
That's right.
And what God?
Religious topics.
It's about a religious topic. Yes, good. So we should expect something like that. But he tells you in his first line, which God is he talking about here? The triune God, the Trinitarian God. Yes, right. So we're talking about the Christian God, right? Which is significant given the subject matter of his poem. So we know right off the bat in the first line that he is addressing the three-personed God of the New Testament. Okay. So he says, batter my heart, three-person God. So there's an intended listener, and that would be the Trinitarian God. What about the person who's speaking? What can you tell me about the persona? Who is he? How would you characterize him given his words here? Well, that's what we're about today, is to figure that out. Let's go back to the idea that this is a sonnet, and I think that will help us to address this poem as well. And we've talked about sonnets before. Yeah, Sarah Beth, that's right. He's a person that's desperately seeking salvation. That's apt. He's a sinner. Good, Virginia. Let's talk about the sonnet form for a minute. We've talked about it before in passing, I think, but we'll just review. A sonnet is a 14-line poem designed to ask a question or to observe a problem and then answer it or deepen or give us some sort of deeper insight into the problem itself, okay? So it's got two parts, A part, B part. A question, B answer, right? A problem, B resolution, okay? So we should be looking for that. Now, there are two different types of sonnet forms. There's the Italian sonnet, sometimes called the Petrarchan sonnet, for Petrarch, the man who invented the form originally. And then there's the Shakespearean form, or the English sonnet. Shakespeare played fast and loose with the form and changed the rhyme scheme, whereas Petrarch developed the question in an octave, an eight-line chunk of the poem, stanza, right? A couple of stanzas. And then resolved that problem or answered his question in a sestet, that is 6 lines. Shakespeare took 12 lines to develop the problem and then tried to resolve or deepen your insight in a rhyming couplet, 2 lines, okay? So let's look and see, what does done do here? Let's look at the rhyme scheme before we even begin to talk about the actual facts of the poem. We've got you, mend, bend, new.
A, B, B, A.
Yeah, A, B, B, A, if we give it letters. Do and defend untrue. A, B, B, A. So we already can see what have we got here?
2 quartets.
So it's a Petrarchan sonnet, right? It's an Italian sonnet. We've got the octave at the beginning. Let's look and see if we're right. Feign enemy, again, I, free me.
Nope. There's a couplet at the end. I think it's Shakespearean.
No, he's played fast and loose himself. He's kind of done a variation on the 2 sonnet forms, and he's done the octave sestet thing, but then at the end, he's put a fine point on it by giving us a Shakespearean couplet at the end, right? Which we would expect since John Donne himself is English, okay?
Sarah Beth says the poem turns at the yet after the octave.
It does, doesn't it?
I don't know. I think the poem turns at the except in the last couplet.
I think Sarah Beth has point though. So let's read it and let's look at the images that he gives to us. Let's first look for the problem. Batter my heart, 3-personed God. He's asking God to do something strange, to beat his heart. Okay, how so? For you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. For you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. Who does that sort of thing? Knock, breathe, shine, mend. What's he describing here?
A glass blower, yes, or maybe like a tinker, like a handyman.
Yeah, somebody like a blacksmith, right? Somebody cleaning up something metal. What do? They knock it with a hammer to get the dents out, right? Breathe, shine it up, try to mend it, right? He's asking God to batter his heart that way. So his heart is like a piece of metal that's dented and needs repair. That I may rise and stand o'erthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. Notice that it's got a rhythmic pattern that mirrors the breathe, knock, breathe, shine, break, blow, burn, right? Knock, breathe, shine, seek to mend, break, blow, burn, make me new. Beautiful, beautiful juxtaposition here, and a continuation of that same kind of a metaphor, right?
So he's a broken or bent piece of metal, and he's asking God, the blacksmith, to remake him.
And God is a blacksmith, right? That's interesting. So we've got a couple of metaphors here, but both resolving around this same image the blacksmith imagery,
And
right?
his force.
And he's extending the metaphor, which is two-pronged. It's a comparison of himself, that is his heart, with a broken, battered piece of metal, and God with the blacksmith. All right. Now we get to the second quadruple line.
Quatrain.
Thank you. I, like a usurped town to another, do labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. What's the new metaphor we're presented with here? First, he's like a dented piece of metal in his heart that needs repair. Now he's like a usurped town to another do. And he uses the word like. In the first 4 lines, he doesn't use the word like. He creates a metaphor, right? His heart is like this, but he doesn't use the word like or as to create the comparison. He just uses an image. Here, he actually uses the word like. He's using a simile here. I am like a usurped town to another do. What could he possibly mean by that? In what way is he like a usurped town to another do? Well, we're supposed to think about what a usurped town to another do is. Can you explain that?
Usurped means like captured.
Okay.
In war.
So a town that's been besieged and overtaken, right?
And owes its taxes or whatever to a usurper.
Yes. And I, who am like this besieged town that's now under arrest, I'm trying to admit you. Who's the you again?
God.
I'm trying to admit you, but oh, to no end. It's no use, right?
So in other words, the town is trying to admit its rightful ruler back in.
Yeah, but no dice. Reason, your viceroy and me. Oh, here's an extended metaphor. In the creation of a new metaphor, he extends the other, right? He's like a usurped town. Reason is his viceroy. What's a viceroy? What's a viceroy? I'm not an ambassador. It's a representative. Yeah, it's somebody who rules in another's place. So he's saying reason really rules in your absence, right? Reason rules in the right king's absence, and it should defend me from what?
The usurping.
From the usurper, right? But my reason is captive and proves weak or untrue. So either it's held captive and can't perform its proper function, or it's weak, or it's unfaithful. But in some way, reason is failing me.
And the town of my heart is usurped.
It's besieged. Yet, even so, dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Oh, Mr. A, you might be right here. What's going on? He's giving us another.
Here is a third metaphor.
We've had 2 so far. We've got the heart like a dented metal that needs repair and God the tinker. We've got him like a besieged town that has been taken over by the enemy. And it's vulnerable because reason, who should be the viceroy, isn't doing his job. Now we've got a third metaphor. Dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but I'm betrothed unto your enemy. What's the new metaphor here?
He's not only a twisted piece of metal. He's not only a usurped town. Now
Now we're looking at a marriage.
He is in a bad
bad marriage. Who's he married to?
Right, Michaela?
He's married to the devil. He's married to sin and death, right? Dearly I love you and be loved fain. I would be loved, but I'm betrothed unto your enemy. The enemy of God is the devil, okay? Divorce me. That's a strange thing to ask, especially if you know anything about Christian doctrine, biblical doctrine. The Old Testament says, God speaks and he says,
I hate
divorce, saith the Lord. I hate divorce. But here he's calling on the Trinitarian God to divorce him, to untie or break that knot again. You guys understand, we use the term all the time, tying the knot. That's just another reference to marriage, break the marriage. Take me to you, he says. Imprison me.
Which is, by the way, a reference to stealing someone's wife, kidnapping.
Yeah. Take me, imprison me, for I accept you enthrall me. What does it mean to enthrall someone?
It means seduce, actually.
or to enslave,
Mm-hmm.
right? Unless you enthrall me, unless you make me a slave, I never shall be free, he says. And I'll never be chaste except you ravish me. What's it mean to ravish someone? Oop. It's a pretty violent image, isn't it? When we talk about ravishing someone, we talk about raping them. It's a very violent image. This is what I mean by the idea of a metaphysical conceit, where you're forced to concede the likeness, but it's outrageous. He's asking God to rape his heart. What? What could he possibly mean by that? And he puts that next to the word chaste. I won't be chaste unless you rape my heart. What? What could he possibly mean? Well, is it or is it not true, according to the doctrine that Christian theology holds out, that the soul is enslaved to sin and death, and that everybody serves something? Either you serve sin, and the wages of sin is death, or you serve God, and you in service to him, in bondage to him, are kept for the day of judgment, kept from judgment, and saved. These are this is the doctrine of the New Testament that he's got going on here. And the likeness is real, according to the doctrine. Unless God enslaves us, we won't be free because we'll be mastered by sin and death instead. Unless God comes in violently and assaults our heart with his love,
captures us and overpowers us
and overpowers us against our own will even, then we'll never be chaste, right? This is the idea that he's drawing out with these outrageous metaphors. Okay, let's go back. I just want to point out here that the beginning of this resolving image starts with yet, but it doesn't get its fine point into the last two lines. So really, Sarah Beth and Mr. A are both right. You can see what he's doing here. He's working with the Petrarchan sonnet, but he breaks with it a little bit in the last two lines to give us a Shakespearean couplet that puts a fine point on that metaphor, that relates that metaphor to his final idea. Okay, and what is that final idea? If the literal subject matter of the poem is his heart, right? The condition of his heart that needs to be mended, or his soul's condition, we could say the heart and soul are equated here. Then what is the figurative meaning of the poem? What are the metaphors there for? What's this really a poem about?
Well, it's about human inability. It's about
yes,
human weakness and divine strength.
It's about the need for the rescue.
It's about need. Yeah.
Yeah.
The need of the heart for rescue.
It's about it's about Augustine's doctrine of the depraved heart. Dead men can't choose. Really, Augustine said, dead men can't choose God. He's trying to choose God. Yeah, dearly, I love you and I would be loved, but I'm betrothed unto your enemy. I can't save myself, is what he's saying. So this entire poem is a petition that God would come in and save him. All right, he does a really nice job of exemplifying the metaphor, the extended metaphor, and its purpose. I hope you can see in this that whenever you see a metaphor, it's not enough to say, oh, look, a metaphor. Oh, look, a simile. But you have to then say, what's it there for? What is it doing? How is it serving the larger purpose of the poet here? Okay, let's look at another Donne poem. This one is Hymn to God, my God, in my sickness. And Mr. Ab, I'm going to ask you to read this one too.
Sure. Hang on. There you go. The Lord throws down at the end. Okay. Since I am coming to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints forevermore I shall be made thy music. As I come, I tune the instrument here at the door, and what I must do then, think here before. Whilst my physicians by their love are grown cosmographers, and I their map, who lie flat on this bed, that by them may be shown that this is my southwest discovery, per fretum febris, by these straits to die. I joy that in these straits I see my west. For though their currents yield return to none, what shall my west hurt me? As west and east in all flat maps, and I am one, are one, so death doth touch the resurrection. Is the Pacific Sea my home? Or are the eastern riches? Is Jerusalem, Anyan and Magellan and Gibraltar, all straits, and none but straits are ways to them, whether where Japheth dwelt, or Sham, or Shem. We think that paradise and Calvary, Christ's cross and Adam's tree stood in one place. Look, Lord, and find both Adams met in me. As the first Adam's sweat surrounds my face, may the last Adam's blood my soul embrace. So in his purple wrapped, receive me, Lord. By these his thorns, give me his other crown. And as to others' souls I preach thy word, be this my text, my sermon to mine own. Therefore that he may raise, the Lord throws down.
Okay, hymn to God, my God, in my sickness. All right from the beginning, he gives us a little context, even in the title of the poem. So the persona is a man who is sick. We know that right from the get-go. And we also know that he is speaking to God again. So it's another holy poem in that regard,
prayer
right?
of
Another
sorts.
kind of prayer. And look at the first stanza. He says, since I am coming to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints forevermore I shall be made thy music. As I come, I tune the instrument here at the door, and what I must do then think here before. What is he doing? What is he professing to do in this poem, in this prayer, in this hymn? What is a hymn, by the way?
A song.
A song. A song. What is he doing here in the first stanza? He's giving us a metaphor,
He's
right?
warming up his instrument.
He's warming up his instrument.
A song of praise, McKenna.
What is the instrument that he's warming up here? What's the metaphor? He's tuning his voice, maybe.
Well, he says, I shall be made thy music forevermore.
I shall be made thy music.
His soul is what he's tuning.
That's a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
I am your music. How is he like God's music? He's talking about a couple of things here, right?
Well, he's talking about the eternal part of himself that's gonna be in heaven forevermore,
yes,
right?
Yes. And he's anticipating that here in a moment. So he's anticipating what? His death.
Yeah,
he's
dying.
Anticipating a grand choir performance, right?
You know, the angel
a
choir.
Command performance, if you will. And he's preparing himself for that moment when he shall be made God's music, right? And he's tuning the instrument here at the door. And what I must do then, think here before. That is, he's preparing himself. He's contemplating the eternal things, right?
Yeah, right.
Whilst my physicians by their love are grown cosmographers, and I their map who lie flat on this bed, that by them may be shown that this is my southwest discovery, per fretum febris, by these straits to die. I joy that in these straits I see my west. Okay, there's a lot going on here. There's more than one association. What's the first association that he gives us here? Let's see if we can get our bearings with that.
What's the metaphor that starts this section off?
Look at that line. Whilst my physicians by their love are grown cosmographers. His physicians are cosmographers. What's a cosmographer?
Map maker.
A map maker.
Or
and
someone who maps the world.
I am their map, right? And as he's lying flat on the bed with them over him, right? They're examining him, right? That by them may be shown that this is my southwest discovery. What's he talking about here, his southwest discovery? These cosmographers, they're mapping the heavens and the earth. They're mapping the universe in him, right? What's he talking about? The southwest discovery, per fretum febris, by these straits to die. The Straits of Magellan, but Magellan died on that journey. The physicians think he's near death. Yes, absolutely. His southwest discovery refers to the fact that from England, one can actually reach the rich Orient by sailing southwest around, right, through the Straits of Magellan. And as Magellan the explorer discovered, as you mentioned here, before dying, per fretum febris, by the wearing away of fever.
The straits, literally or figuratively.
Exactly,
right?
right.
The difficulty of fever.
Before reaching his object. Donne writes, ill with a similar kind of fever, right? He's going through a similar kind of strait. He's in dire straits here, right? He's in a narrow place here. But he says, I joy that in these straits, in this narrow spot in which he finds himself, he sees his west. What is his west?
By the way, I just got to jump in here. His use of the word straight, both in Latin and in English, is fabulous. It is fabulous because it is a geographical term, right? It refers to a narrow passage between two pieces of land.
An extension of the metaphor that he begins with the maps.
And also it is a medical term or just a term about life that refers to pressure. It refers to difficulty. And those terms are actually, they partake of the same idea even without the spiritual metaphor. The geographical and the personal are similar already. The word straight means difficulty, either in terms of space or in terms of circumstance. It's just wonderful.
It's beautiful. What does he mean then when he says, I joy that in these straits I see my west?
That's just great. It's just great. Through the narrow gap presented by this difficulty, this strait, I see the goal of the explorers to find a way to the west.
Okay. And the joy then, what is his west? His new world that he seeks.
Yeah.
Heaven,
right.
And thus the joy, right? Because actually, if you think about west, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west.
West is a metaphor for death.
West is a metaphor for death as well. So
right?
There's an irony in that line because there's joy in his west. There's joy in the straits, this death.
Yeah, he says there in the third line, what shall my west hurt me? The setting sun? That's okay.
Yep.
West and east are one. If you go far enough west, you get to east.
Though their currents yield return to none, though it's going away, the currents are going that direction and that direction only, can't go backwards. What shall my west hurt me? Death, right? Death be not proud, he says in another one of his verses. As west and east in all flat maps and I am one, are one. He's reminding you, don't forget my metaphor here.
I'm a map,
remember? As west and east in all flat maps and I am one, are one. So death does touch the resurrection. What's he mean that west and east are one? You look at a map, west, east, or actually, since you're seeing me in opposition, west, east for you, right?
Nice job, love.
But if you take the map and you roll it, they come together. Think of the globe, right? West and east are one. They touch one another. And in the same way, he draws that metaphor to a fine point with that last line, death touches the resurrection. Like west and east touch on a map, death and resurrection touch in life, in death, right? And then he amplifies, is the Pacific Sea my home? Or are the eastern riches? Is Jerusalem, Anian, Magellan, and Gibraltar? What are those? Anian's the Bering Straits, by the way. Magellan and Gibraltar, all straits.
Straits.
None but straits are ways to them, whether where Japhet dwelt, or Shem, or Sham, who are the three sons of Noah, right? Believed to have populated Asia and Africa and Europe. Okay. Is the Pacific Sea my home? The eastern riches, Jerusalem, any of these places? No. What's he saying? Why does he talk about those straits, those passages? Why does he ask, is it my home? Are any of these places my home? Are they mine? Remember, he's talking about maps of what? The world, right? And what's he saying here? Is the world my home? No, they're all straits. And what's a strait? It's passage, right?
And also a difficulty.
And a difficulty,
yeah.
But a passage, and a passage always leads somewhere, right? Okay. We think that Paradise and Calvary Christ's cross and Adam's tree stood in one place. Do you know this legend? This is actually a popular legend in the 17th century. This idea that the cross, Jesus' cross, was actually standing in the very place where paradise and the tree of life stood in the Garden of Eden. Right? It's a popular legend in his time based on typology. He says, we think that paradise and Calvary, Christ's cross and Adam's tree stood in one place. Look, Lord, and find both Adams met in me. Oh, that's interesting. So the cross is one and the same as the tree of life, right? And Adam, the old Adam, and the new Adam, Christ, are one and the same as well. He says, look, Lord, and find both of those Adams met in me. What does he mean, met in me?
It's a little riff on that idea of east and west touching each other.
Yes.
That one is the other. They're touching in him.
They're combined.
They're combined. That's the word I'm looking for.
Right? As the first Adam's sweat surrounds my face, may the last Adam's blood my soul embrace. Who's the last Adam again? The last
Adam reference to Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Christ was the second Adam. Yeah, that's exactly right. So what does he mean? May the last Adam's soul, blood my soul embrace. So I'm suffering the results of the first Adam's bad decisions, his sin, right?
The death of my flesh.
The death of Christ, then, his blood wraps his soul up, right? So that he's covered. He's covered by the life, death, and resurrection of the second Adam.
That's right, Key. He's asking to be saved by Christ's sacrifice.
To be justified. Yeah, exactly. So he says, in his purple wrapped, receive me, Lord. What is this? This is another beautiful image. In his purple wrapped. What is the purple that he's wanting to be wrapped in? Jesus was dressed in purple when he was accused. So the purple is what? The robe.
It's a reference to royal robes and also to blood.
Yes, exactly. In his purple wrapped, his royal robes of righteousness. In his righteousness wrapped. This is quite a lovely image because purple, you had to infer two things, and he meant both of them. Mr. A says the blood of Christ, and you said, Sarah Beth, his robe that he was wearing when he was accused.
And Key says, yeah, royal purple.
Exactly. So you get the concept of being wrapped in a robe, and we infer a robe of righteousness, right? This is an association, and this kind of association, we call it metonymy. Metonymy, identifying a thing by something associated with it, right? So we're identifying the righteousness of Christ with the blood of Christ. We're identifying the blood of Christ with the color of that blood. We're identifying the robe of righteousness with the color of the robe itself, right? This is all metonymical in that sense. So in his purple wrapped, and by the way, metonymy is a kind of symbolism, right? So he's using purple symbolically so that we'll infer those big ideas and the things wrapped up in them. We'll infer all of the crucifixion imagery, and then we'll infer all of the theology that's attached to that historical event and that historical personality, right? So in his purple wrapped, receive me, Lord. By these his thorns, give me his other crown. What thorns? What are thorns associated with? This is another kind of metonymy, isn't it? Another kind of symbolic reference. What do the thorns refer to?
Well, they refer to the sufferings of Christ at his crucifixion.
Historically, remember, they made a crown of thorns and pressed it on his brow and he bled, right? This is referring to the sufferings of Christ at the crucifixion. By these his thorns, give me his other crown. What other crown? What is the other crown that he's alluding to here? Yeah, good, Sarah Beth. That's also apt. The idea that thorns have to do with what the ground yields because Adam sinned and the whole world fell. Remember the curse that Adam would work the ground and it would only bear thorns and thistles, right? Yeah, good. That's actually wonderful symbolic imagery that's worked into the history of the crucifixion itself. I often think, when I think about the actual historical facts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, that God was writing poetry in the life of the man, Jesus Christ, making associations, metonymical associations that weighted the moments, the historical moments, with gravity, and made a picture that would make it almost impossible to miss what he was doing there in the person of Christ. He was a poet too. By these his thorns give me his other crown. What is the other crown? If not the crown of thorns, it's the crown of, good, Sarah, that will not fade away, reserved in heaven for those of you who are kept by the power of God. It's the crown of life, right? Good. And as to other souls, I preach thy word, be this my text, my sermon to mine own. I didn't mention, but John Donne was actually rector of the Cathedral of St. Paul in London. And he preached, every weekly he preached. It was his job to preach. And he says, let this be my sermon to my own soul. Therefore, that he may raise, the Lord throws down. It's an ironic little line of opposition right from the scriptures. That he may raise, the Lord throws down. We got to go down to go up, right? This kind of imagery. Yeah, the entire poem, the idea is that the only way out is through.
Yeah.
You've got to press through.
That's why
this
the straight image is so good. By the way, one observation about some of the smaller details of poetry that we've been talking about so far this year. Every line of this glorious poem, I don't know if anyone noticed, is in pure, unadulterated iambic pentameter.
So in his purple wrapped, receive me, Lord. Dun, 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 dun. Remember, so, unstressed, stressed, 5 per line.
Even if you don't notice, the beauty and purity and consistency of the poem sort of subconsciously soothes, doesn't it?
Look at the rhyme scheme. Room, more, come, door, before. A, B, A, B, B. Mm-hmm. Groan, lie, shown, discover, I, die. Same.
A, B, A, B, B.
Yep. He's kind of keeping that A, B, A, B, B throughout the poem.
Mm-hmm. Wonderfully consistent.
One of the things I like so much about this poem is the way that he uses metaphors to encompass things that are beyond themselves, beyond the immediate comparison, so that the metaphor becomes symbolic in some way. So really, when you think of symbols, a symbol is just a pervasive metaphor, right? Common symbols are really easily recognizable. For example, when you think of Valentine's Day, what do we give one another? We give one another hearts, right?
Yeah.
And roses. Why? Well, because they signify or symbolize love, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever you see a dove, what does the dove symbolize?
Peace.
Peace. What about a flag? We use flags all the time. Flags, patriotism, right?
Or your country.
Exactly. So symbols play on these associations writ large over history, right? They're so common that they're pedantic, right? But the symbols themselves, they play on emotions through association. The flag conjures an emotion in the human breast that is patriotism. The heart, the red heart or the rose, also calls up those warm feelings of love that are associated with it. So when you spot any of these common symbols in poetry, I want you to look sharp, because the poet may be trying to lead you to some broader associations, okay? Remember, the poet is working in metaphor very intentionally all the while. And sometimes he resorts to a very common metaphor, a broad metaphor, a symbol, in order to lead you down the trail that he wants you to take, okay? So let's just make a list of some of these broader associations, or some of these symbols that you can watch for when you read. Sleep oftentimes is used to represent death. Shakespeare said in Hamlet, to sleep, perchance to dream, There's the rub,
For in
right?
that sleep of death, what dreams may
What
come.
dreams may come, right?
I don't think I like it.
I don't know if death is such a great. I mean, on the one hand, death is sleep, but when we sleep, we sometimes dream, and sometimes those dreams are nightmares, right? This is what he's saying. He's comparing sleep and death. Seasons are often used to suggest age. We're going to look at a poem called "Nothing Gold Can Stay," and he's going to talk about nature's first color is green, right? And green is youth, right? And then he's going to talk about gold, and gold is autumn, right? We're supposed to think about not just the seasons, but about ages when we read this poem, and time. And Shakespeare does the same sort of thing in his Sonnet 3. He says, "Thou art thy mother's glass, her mirror, and she in thee calls back the lovely April of her prime." April is what? A month in
Spring.
So he's talking about from her what? Young adulthood, from her youth, right?
Beauty.
Light is often a comparison for vision. It signifies vision. "When I consider how my light is spent," Milton says, "and on his blindness, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodged in me useless. When I consider how my light is spent," when my days, right? My days are gone, and my light, that is my sight, is gone. Before even half of my days are gone, my light is spent. The Psalm says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." What is meant by light? Vision, right? Your word gives me vision as I walk through this world. A very poetic image. Milton again, he says, "I waked, she fled, and day brought back my night." Again, directly related to his blindness, but what's he talking about? But vision. Water is often symbolic of this idea of rebirth. It's kind of a baptism imagery, right? Take a look at this. This comes from Dante's Divine Comedy, the climactic moment in the Divine Comedy. It comes in the second book of the comedy, in the Purgatorio, when Dante makes it to the top of Mount Purgatory and he finds the Garden of Eden and watches as the Lady Beatrice, the woman who has called him on this journey and fitted him with an apt guide in Virgil, comes to meet them, because Virgil can go no farther, being unbaptized.
Pagan.
He's pagan, right? He can't go anymore as his guide. So Beatrice is going to take over, the blessed divine Beatrice, and she confronts Dante with his own sin. Now that he's seen all the sins of others, and he understands that the wages of sin are death, and he's seen sinners who die trusting in Christ, being shriven on Mount Purgatory, learning to love the right things the right way, he now has his own critical moment. And he says, "No sooner lifted I mine aspect up than downward sunk that vision I beheld of goodly creatures vanish, and mine eyes, yet unassured and wavering, bent their light on Beatrice." He's looking, and all he sees is Beatrice. "Towards the animal who joins two natures in one form, she turned." She comes to him in a train, like a festival procession. And at the front of the train is a griffin, a medieval symbol of Christ. And he is pulling a cart that has within it the church itself. And he pulls that cart up to a tree and takes the what do you call it? The post that he's hanging on to draw the cart forward, and leans it up against the tree, and the tree's all shriveled, but when he leans that post up against the tree, it blossoms again. This is a beautiful image of the work of Christ where the church is concerned, in bringing it up to the tree of life and causing life to bloom once more, right? And then that image, then when he takes that post and puts it on up against the tree, we get that image of the cross present there. It's lovely. Let's keep reading. "Towards the animal who joins two natures in one form, Beatrice turned." So she's looking at the griffin, who is Christ. "And even under shadow of her veil, imparted by the verdant rill that flowed between, in loveliness appeared as much her former self surpassing, as on earth all others she surpassed." Oh, she was so much more beautiful now that she's glorified, than she was when she was just a human soul on earth. Remorseful goads shot sudden through me. Having already seen his sin, he's convicted in this moment, right? Each thing else, the more its love had late beguiled me, now the more I was loathsome. Now, what's he done? Well, she's convicted him of the fact that he didn't just love her, but that as soon as she was out of sight, she was out of mind, and he stopped loving the things that were lovely in her, largely um, her loves. And what did she love but God and the things of God? As soon as she was out of sight, she was out of mind, and so were those things. And instead, he loved the baser things of life and the baser women. And remorseful goads shot sudden through me. Each thing else, the more its love had late beguiled me, now the more I was loathsome. On my heart so keenly smote the bitter consciousness that on the ground o'erpowered I fell. He's so overcome with his guilt that he falls down. And what my state was then, she knows who was the cause. Beatrice knows why he falls down in his swoon. When now my strength flowed back, returning outward from the heart, the lady whom alone I first had seen, I found above me. Loose me not, she cried, loose not thy hold, and lo, had dragged me high as to my neck into a stream, while she, still as she drew me after, swept along, swift as a shuttle bounding o'er the wave. The blessed shore approaching then was heard so sweetly, to asperges me. That is, what? What is to asperges me? You cleanse me, right? That I may not remember, much less tell the sound. The beauteous dame, her arms expanding, clasped my temples and emerged me where 'twas fit the wave should drench me. And thence raising up within the fourfold dance of lovely nymphs, presented me so laved, that is so washed, and with their arm they each did cover me. So the four virtues come as lovely nymphs dancing around him after he has been what? Baptized. This is baptismal imagery, right? So the water in conjunction with this idea of rebirth, renewal, purification, baptism. Whenever you see this kind of water imagery, think about those ideas: renewal, rebirth, baptism. Okay, because remember, poetry is playing with these symbolic images. So when you see these images, look sharp. Consider, could he be using this symbolically? Okay, and how are you going to know if the poet is using something like this symbolically? Where you're going to look at the context in which the image is presented or the association is potentially made. And if it doesn't play out, that is, if it's not confirmed by the contextual things present in the poem, then maybe it's not intended to be a symbol after all. But oftentimes it is. Okay. All right. So water connected to rebirth, renewal, or purification. Colors are another thing that poets use. We've already seen that.
We talked about that already.
And oh, my love is like a red, red rose. That idea of red meaning passion, right? A lot of different colors imply a lot of different things. Red can be passion. It can also be anger. I saw red, right? You know, this term. I was angry. Or Shakespeare refers to that green-eyed animal.
Monster.
The green-eyed monster. What is that? Jealousy, right? Green can be associated with jealousy. But we also notice that in Robert Frost's poem that we're going to look at in a little bit here, that green can also refer to life or youth or spring, right? It's got a couple of different possible associations. Black, on the other hand, is the opposite, referring to something like death or sin, right? White, in contrast, can be referencing like purity or innocence, something like that. So always pay attention to these colors. We noticed the use of color in John Donne's poem that we just looked at when he talked about "in your purple wrapped," and that was intended to make us think of royalty, right? The lordship of Christ. In your purple wrapped. What does the lordship of Christ mean? Lordship over what? Lordship over sin and death, right? So we're supposed to always think about the colors that are present in poems and look for some symbolic meaning in the color itself, because it's often intentional. In a nature image, where a lot of times the natural image is presented in order to associate itself with simplicity or with something that's nurturing, especially when you're reading the works of the Romantic poets, because they used nature this way all the time. It was renewing in some way. Look at William Wordsworth's My Heart Leaps Up. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. What does he mean? My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. The rainbow in the sky is this natural image, right? And why would his heart leap up at a rainbow? Well, the rainbow itself is a pervasive metaphor that's associated with what? Historically speaking.
God's redemption.
Yeah, the redemption of God. So was it when my life began, when I was a child and I saw rainbows, my heart leapt? So is it now I am a man? Still, my heart leaps at this, yes, Michaela, this promise of God. So be it when I shall grow old or let me die. But what is this? This is a promise. He's almost like he's preaching to himself. Don't forget the promise of God. He says the child is father of the man. What could he mean here? The child is father of the man. That seems like an oxymoron. In what way does a child father the man? The child teaches the man, yes. And what does the child teach the man in this sense? Innocence, maybe. Maybe wonder, joy, yes. Faith, yes. All of these things. He says the child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be like his, right? Bound each to each by natural piety. I think it's that natural piety, that piety he sees in nature, literally in nature, in the image of the rainbow, but also in the nature of the child to trust, right? And he hopes that his own soul will be fathered in this way by the child that he once was, to develop in his natural piety, never to lose his natural piety. And Key, that is actually why this is such an ironically apt image. Generally speaking, the father is the elder of the two, right? But in this sense, he is saying that the child has something to teach the man instead of vice versa.
The idea is that the child, everyone is a child first and then a man. So he is, in a sense, his childish self is his own ancestor. And Wordsworth implies that something has been lost in the process of becoming a man.
Or that he hopes it will never be lost.
Or that he hopes it won't be lost, right?
And that is that natural piety that comes up in that last line. But notice again, it's the natural imagery, the nature imagery, being connected with simplicity, nurturing, and piety, right? What is natural? Piety, respect for God. Sometimes, let's see if we got another one here. Yeah, you've got another one here.
That's
quarter
after though. Maybe we move
maybe
on.
we'll scoot along past daffodils because I want to get to some of these other images as well. Sometimes poets use animals in order to call out character qualities and things like that. And again, this quote comes from Dante's Divine Comedy, from the first book, the Inferno. That first canto in the Inferno, when Dante, the persona, is trying to go up the path, that is up the mountain to God, but his path is blocked by three animals. Notice here, and lo, almost where the ascent began, almost before he'd begun, a panther light and swift exceedingly, which was with a spotted skin was covered o'er, and never moved she from before my face, nay, rather did impede so much my way that many times I to return had turned. The time was the beginning of the morning, and up the sun was mounting with those stars that with him were, what time the love divine at first in motion set those beauteous things. So were to me occasion of good hope, the variegated skin of that wild beast, the hour of time and the delicious season, but not so much that did not give me fear, a lion's aspect which appeared to me. He seemed as if against me he were coming with head uplifted and with ravenous hunger. I can't say the rest of it. So that it seemed the air was afraid of him. And a she-wolf that with all hungering seemed to be laden in her meagerness, and many folk has caused to live forlorn. She brought upon me so much heaviness with the affright that from her aspect came, that I the hope relinquished of the height. All right, so the three beasts. And what are these three beasts representing, that are blocking his path in his ascent to God? Well, we've got the leopard, symbolic of fraud and lust, the lion, symbolic of pride and violence, and the wolf, symbolic of avarice and greed. So what is he saying here? He's creating a little bit of an allegory here, right? The allegory of the soul, and his soul's trying to get up to God, but his sin, the sins of lust and pride and violence and avarice, right? These things are getting in the way and impeding his progress up the mountain to God. And at this moment, when he turns round, that Virgil appears to him and says, let me help you out here. Someone sent me from beyond the grave, right? To come and be your guide, that she might attempt to steer you in the right direction and right your course, right? That is, that she might help you get a handle on these sins, their nature, and their consequences, so that you can find the proper path again and not be lost to sin and death. This is the Divine Comedy. But notice how he's using these natural images and these animals in particular to symbolize sins, okay? So when you see particular animals present in poetry, look to see, guess is the wrong word, but contemplate why the animal, that particular animal, is the one that the poet has seized upon for his image. What kind of a metaphor is he making with this particular association? What does he want you to intuit from it, right? All right. We have one more here. Forests. Forests are oftentimes included to suggest a test, and this is also from the comedy. It begins in the first line: midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. When you're in a dark forest, what does it mean? It means that you are lost. We say a cliche that we use pretty frequently is that we couldn't see the forest for the trees. That is, we were lost in all the details of the forest. We were like Dante, lost in a dark wood, right? So forests sometimes are places where we get lost, or places where we experience a test, right? We're in a maze of confusion there, something like that. So when there's a forest present, ask yourself why. What's the forest supposed to make you think about, or what are you supposed to associate with that forest? Robert Frost, in his poem Birches, discusses the forest and the trees in this same kind of way, right? Okay. Light is another kind of symbol that you find that's very common symbol. And light, oftentimes the sun in particular, is associated with the Son of God. Jesus is the light of the world. In the beginning was the Word. He's also referred to as the Word, but he's the light of the world. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path, the Word of God. Jesus, the living Word, is the light of God and the light of the world. The moon, on the other hand, is oftentimes associated with madness, especially if you happen to be reading Shakespeare. He uses that image quite frequently. So all of these things to say that common symbols that maybe you're already aware of, the poet uses them freely to impart things into his poem or into his verse, without having to extrapolate necessarily, but to allude, to offer an allusion symbolically that's cogent to his larger theme. Okay. So remember, though, that symbols are always to be considered in context with the rest of the poem, to imply a specific meaning. Don't just go wild looking for symbols, and certainly don't force a symbol where the context doesn't support it. If nothing else, a poem was always written to communicate the author's larger ideas and meanings. So if the symbol doesn't play out within the context of the larger poem, then it's not serving the poet's purpose. And even though the word is present, doesn't necessarily mean what you might think it means. Okay. When a symbol is used in such a way that it becomes pervasive in a poem, so that there's a one-to-one correspondence with the things or ideas in this world relating to the things and ideas figuratively in the poem becomes an allegory. consider the poem Redemption by George Herbert, which I think that we looked at. Do you have it for us to look at here today?
I do not.
We don't have Redemption. Are you sure? I thought I pulled that.
Oh, yeah, I
we
do.
do. Let's look at that really fast. Redemption by George Herbert. Having been tenant long to a rich lord, not thriving, I resolve it to be bold and make a suit unto him to afford a small rented lease and cancel the old. In heaven at his manor I him sought. They told me there that he was lately gone about some land which he had dearly bought long since on earth to take possession. I straight returned, and knowing his great birth, sought him accordingly in great resorts, in cities, theaters, gardens, parks, and courts. At length I heard a ragged noise and mirth of thieves and murderers. There I him espied, who straight, your suit is granted, said, and died. We've got a kind of allegory here. Let's see if we can see it. What do we get in the first line? Having been tenant long to a rich lord not thriving, I resolved to be bold and make a suit to him to afford a new small rented lease and cancel the old. Who's the speaker? Who's the persona in this poem? A tenant. What is a tenant? What's meant by that? Define tenant. Person who rents a building, right? A tenant is somebody who rents an apartment.
Living on someone else's property.
Right. So he's been tenant to a rich lord. So we've got two characters basically in this drama. We've got the leaser and the leasee, the rich lord. And he's not thriving. He says, having been tenant long to a rich lord, not thriving. I'm not thriving. What does that mean?
He's in over his head.
He's
underwater.
In over his head. Yeah, he can't pay the bills, right? I resolved to be bold and make a suit to the rich lord to afford a new small rented lease and cancel the old. He's in over his head with the old lease, so he's going to go see the rich landowner, the lord, and ask him if he cancel this lease and give him a new one that he can afford, okay? In heaven, at his manor, I him sought. Oh, we get some new information about this rich lord. Who is this rich lord?
Well, his manor is in heaven, so he must be God.
He must be God. He must be the Lord of heaven and earth, right? So as he develops this story, we get more information that makes us aware of the fact that he's creating an allegory here, right? So if God is the rich Lord, then the tenant is whom? The tenant, the tenant not thriving, the tenant with the lease he can't afford. Who's he?
He's the sinner.
He's the sinner. He's man, the sinner, who cannot pay his bills. He's in up to his eyeballs in sin, right? All right. He can't keep the old covenant. What is the old covenant that he's referring to? The old lease.
Doesn't use the word covenant, does he?
No, he doesn't. He says, not thriving, I resolved to be bold and make suit unto him to afford a new small rented lease and cancel the old lease. The old lease is the old covenant. What is the old covenant? A covenant is just a what? It's an agreement between a legally binding contract, right? Between two people.
Cerebus says the covenant of law. Michaela says the Old Testament.
He can't keep the law. This is his problem. He's going to go to this rich Lord who is the Lord of heaven and earth and say, could you please cancel that old contract, the law, and give me one I can keep, because I can't keep this law. So he goes to heaven, at his manor I him sought. They told me there that he was lately gone about some land which he had dearly bought long since on earth to take possession. He'd gone to take possession of something on earth. So I returned, and knowing his great birth, I sought him accordingly in great resorts. I mean, he was the Lord after all. So where does he look for this Lord when he returns to earth? In cities, theaters, gardens, parks, in courts, all the places that you'd expect to find royalty, right? At length, I heard a ragged noise and mirth of thieves and murderers. There I him espied. Where does he find him? In the resorts?
Among the sweepings of the street.
Yeah, in particular, between thieves and murderers, which is an allusion to what? When was the Lord of heaven and earth found between a thief and a murderer?
On the cross of his crucifixion.
On the cross, yeah. Remember, Jesus was crucified between two lawbreakers, a thief and a murderer. You You remember this? And the one said, "Remember me when I come in, when I come into your kingdom," or something like that. How does that go?
That's basically it. Yeah.
Remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's what he said. And Jesus said, "You will be with me today, even in paradise." Right. So this is locating this action historically in time and place. He's anchoring it this one-to-one correlation, so that we find ourselves in a historic moment, right? A momentous time. There I him espied, that is on the cross, whose straight your suit is granted, said, and died. Your suit, what suit is granted? What is the suit? What is a suit?
It's a lawsuit. It references stanza number 1, and make a suit unto him to
Yeah,
afford a new small rented lease.
Exactly. And he says, your suit is granted. That is, I give you your new small
You got a new
rented
contract
lease, and I
now.
cancel the old, which is essentially, through allegory, he's explaining what happened at the crucifixion. What happened at the crucifixion? What was Jesus doing when he died on the cross? Well, he was canceling
the
old
old
lease and creating a new lease, right?
Small
Granting
rented
a new
lease.
one. That is, out with the old covenant, in with the new, right? So he satisfied the old covenant and granted the new. How did he do it? Well, through death. Whose straight your suit is granted, said, and died. And notice that he did it before he'd ever been approached. That is, George Herbert is considering the redemption of man and the nature of the Lord who granted it, who knew we needed it before we ever asked him for it, and who granted it with his life, right? What a beautiful allegory here. And how does he create the allegory? Well, through all these symbols: the symbol of the rich Lord, the symbol of the poor tenant, right? All of these things, as he creates this extended metaphor with one-to-one correspondence with the actual historical events of the crucifixion and the historical problem of sin. He creates this lovely allegory that's so theologically laden. Okay, we skipped one, did we not?
We did, but you wanted to make sure and have time for the
Where are we?
the
What
Christian
time?
ones. It's about 9:30, so it'd be a good
Okay,
time
we
to
have-
jump over.
We have time. I think we can do this Robert Frost one first. That won't take long. It's a
You
short
asked
one.
me to help you.
I know. And we have to stop when?
10 till.
It's 3. Okay, we have 10 minutes for this, and then we can read the other two. Okay, let's go back to Nothing Gold Can Stay, since I told you we would do it earlier. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. Okay, nothing gold can stay. What's going on here? What do you see in this particular poem right off the bat? We see a lot of imagery, right? Nature's first green is gold is the first thing that we're told. What do you think he means? He's holding up to us what? Nature's first green is gold. There's a lot going on here. Yes, youth. And what does he mean that nature's first green is gold? What's gold?
I think it's interesting that he's using gold in that first line, and even in the last line, not as a color, but as he's referring to the precious metal and its value.
Yes, its value.
Mm-hmm.
Nature's first green, its youth,
Good
is
key, that's right.
Valuable. It's the most valuable. And it's also the hardest hue to hold, the hardest thing to hang on to. Her early leaf is a flower. Her early leaf's a flower, but only for an hour. What is he implying in that statement? Nature's early leaf is a flower.
First fleeting. Of all, it's a reference to the fact that you get flowers before leaves, but also that it's fleeting. Yeah.
It's fleeting, only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. Leaf subsides to leaf. What does that mean?
Well, what I just said, the flower becomes a leaf for the rest of the summer, right?
What's in that word subsides? That's a really strong verb.
It is.
Why do you think he uses it?
Well, most people would argue that a leaf is not as beautiful as a flower.
It subsides.
So there's something that's ebbing
It's
away in
ebbing
terms of
away.
beauty.
Yes. He doesn't say gives way to, he says subsides to. The syntax that he chooses here imparts the tone that he has towards his subject matter. And there is an element of loss.
Yeah, right,
yes,
Key.
good, Key. In his language here, leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. Okay, now he's imparting in another historic moment, a landmark in human history. What comes into the poem? What does he draw into the poem with the word Eden? What's in an allusion to?
Well, to sin,
The fall.
to the fall of man.
Good,
Yeah,
yeah.
good.
So Eden, in the same way, Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down today. Nothing gold can stay. What's he talking about here? What's this poem really about? Literally, he's looking at a nature image, right? The blossoming of nature in spring that subsides to summer, that goes down to fall, right? But what's he figuratively talking about here, really?
Well, it's hard. It's funny to say this of Robert Frost, but he's talking about the curse.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about the fact that nature is fallen.
Yeah.
And entropy.
Entropy is always
curse,
working.
Right?
That is exactly right. That's the larger subject, the implicit subject matter here is not nature, but the facts of nature, the way everything is running down, right? Yeah.
Interesting. The next to last line, I haven't really thought of it before. So dawn goes down today. You tend to think of the progress of the sun in the sky as all natural and all equally good. But he says dawn, when it's like the leaf of a tree, is more beautiful and more valuable, maybe because of its fragility,
because of its potentiality,
because it's potential, but also temporary. Mm-hmm. And that midday sun is not as good.
No, something's been lost.
Something's been lost.
And it's notice that he uses time, the subject of time, to get at that sense of the fleeting nature of life and things that are passing, never to be held again, right? The value of human life and the potential of human life that ebbs away just naturally because of the fallenness of man and the world. If we're talking about nature and its seasons, that means summer and new youth will come again. Yes, that's certainly true. But he's not talking about that. He's talking about the fact that it goes away. It's like a repeated mask, like it's like a drama that's repeated before our eyes so that we don't miss it in that regard. Every year we see it again.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. All right. Let's skip over spring and fall. We'll see it again before too long because I want to have a chance to give to you this little Christmas blessing before we go. This is John Donnegan, 17th century poet that we met in Batter My Heart and in the poem about the hymn to God in my sickness. Okay, he wrote this around Christmas time. He wrote a series of sonnets that he called La Corona, or The Crown. And I've taken two of those poems out of the sonnet cycle to give to you today because they have to do with the season that we're all celebrating right now, Christmas. So I'd like to read the two of them and think about metaphors and symbols in order to see what he might be saying to us about this time of year. Okay, Mr. A, would you like to read Annunciation?
I would love to. Salvation to all that will is nigh. That all, which always is all everywhere, which cannot sin, and yet all sins must bear, which cannot die, yet cannot choose but die. Lo, faithful Virgin, yields himself to lie in prison in thy womb. And though he there can take no sin, nor thou give, yet he'll wear, taken from thence, flesh, which death's force may try. Ere by the spheres time was created, thou wast in his mind, who is thy son and brother, whom thou conceivest, conceived. Yea, thou art now thy maker's maker, and thy father's mother. Thou hast light in dark, and shut'st in little room immensity, cloistered in thy dear womb.
Immensity cloistered in thy dear womb now leaves his well-beloved imprisonment. There he had made himself to his intent weak enough now into the world to come. But oh, for thee, for him, hath the inn no room? Yet lay him in this stall, and from the Orient stars and wise men will travel to prevent the effect of Herod's jealous general doom. Seest thou, my soul, with thy faith's eyes, how he which fills all place, yet none holds him, doth lie? Was not his pity towards thee wondrous high, that would have need to be pitied by thee? Kiss him, and with him into Egypt go, with his kind mother, who partakes thy woe. Okay, let's go up to the beginning here, and let's take a look at Annunciation and Nativity in turn. Okay, Annunciation refers immediately to what? Any of you who have grown up in a Christian church should know what the Annunciation is.
The announcement by the angel to the Virgin Mary.
That she's about to bear a son, right? That she will bear a son and she'll name him Christ Jesus, right, because he'll take away the sins of the world. Okay, so the Annunciation, salvation to all that will is nigh. Here's the announcement. Anybody that will, right? That will come to him, it's near. That all, which always is all everywhere, which cannot sin, and yet all sins must bear, which cannot die, yet cannot choose but die, lo, faithful Virgin, yield himself to lie in prison in your womb. Okay, what does he mean, that all? What does he mean by the term all? To what or whom does he refer with the term all? Christ, yeah, Jesus, that all. And capital A is your tip off there, right? In what way is Jesus all? Well, he's going to extrapolate with the metaphor. Jesus is the all, and he is everywhere, and he cannot sin, but all sins must bear. He cannot die, but cannot choose but die, right? He is the great all. And lo, faithful Virgin, to whom this announcement is being made, right? The Virgin Mary, yield himself to lie in prison in your womb. Your womb is a prison. That's an interesting metaphor. And though he there can take no sin, nor thou give, yet he'll wear, taken from their flesh, which death's force may try. What does he mean? In what way is Mary's womb a prison? And what does he mean? That he can't take sin from there, but he will take something from there. And what is the thing that he will take if it's not sin?
Well, he takes on flesh, so he will be subject to death, we find.
Yes, he takes humanity in
right.
The incarnation. He's talking about the incarnation, right? But he can't take sin. He doesn't. So this is the virgin birth, the Immaculate Conception, that kind of an illusion is present here, right? And he doesn't take on the sin of man, but he takes on the flesh of man in this transaction. Ere by the spheres time was created, thou wast in his mind, who is thy son and brother, whom thou conceivest conceived. What? What does he mean? What does he mean? Now he's considering the relationship between the Virgin Mary and the baby that she bears. What is the relationship?
Well, it's complicated, is what he's saying.
Before time was ever created, you were in his mind. Whose mind? Who is thy son and brother? Yes, it's very complicated. In Jesus's mind, that is, Mary was in the mind of Christ before she was ever created, before time was ever created, right? And now he, in her womb, is both her son and also her brother. What is the relationship inferred by that? In what way is he her brother?
So Christian teaching is that all believers in Jesus are, along with Jesus, the sons of God, and therefore brothers and sisters to each other in the sight of God.
And children of Adam as well, right? Brothers and sisters, because we all come from Adam and Eve, the first parents. Let's see. Ere by the spheres time was created, thou wast in his mind, who is thy son and brother, whom thou conceivest. Conceived means what? I conceived of it. I thought of it. I dreamt it up. I imagined it, right?
Mhm.
The one that you conceived in your womb conceived of you,
In his
he says,
mind.
in his mind. Yea, thou art now thy maker's maker and thy father's mother. He's playing with this image. Why? Why is he making these strange, outrageous conceits? You are your maker's maker and your father's mother. Why is he playing with this?
It's the effect is to make the incarnation seem more miraculous.
Yes.
Yeah.
The I think what he's trying to do is amplify the condescension of God in submitting himself to be made in the womb of Mary, right? To be mothered in this way. Thou hast light in dark, and shutst in little room immensity cloistered in thy dear womb. Thou hast light in dark. So again, with the prison imagery, right? There in the prison of her womb is her maker. That is the light of the world, shut in the darkness, right? And immensity in this little room, in the dear womb. It's cloistered there. You think cloister, what do you think of? I immediately think of
An abbey or a
yes,
monastery.
a nunnery, that kind of thing. A cloister, a close place, right? And immensity is in this little room. Immensity goes back to that first line, that all, which always is all everywhere. Have you ever thought about that? That when Jesus was incarnate and was in the womb, he was that all that was everywhere, localized in a very small place. Imagine the power necessary to condense himself in such a way. Okay, let's look at the next section. And by the way, did you notice the 14 lines? We got a sonnet here, right? ABBA, ABBA, CD, CD, EE. Immensity cloistered in thy dear womb now leaves his well-beloved imprisonment. There he hath made himself to his intent weak enough now into the world to come. But oh, for thee, for them hath the inn no room? Okay, he's playing with this idea that he presented in the last couple of lines of the previous sonnet, this idea of immensity cloistered in a small space. And he begins with it here, immensity cloistered in thy dear womb, leaves his well-beloved imprisonment. What does that mean? It means he's born, right? It's the nativity. He's born. There he hath made himself to his intent weak enough now into the world to come. That's an amazing concept. God had to make himself weak enough to enter the world. That is, he had to become flesh to enter the world.
Yeah, good, Sarah Beth. Normally a baby grows strong enough to be born, but Jesus had to become weak enough to be born. It sounds like dumb, doesn't it? The metaphysical conceit always.
He has made himself to his intent. I like the way that he says that too, that as he intended to, he has weakened himself on purpose. It was intentional so that he could come into the world. But oh, for thee, for him hath the inn no room. Now we're going to look at this idea of room, of space, another way. But the world has no room for him. Isn't that so interesting? The world has no room for him. It's too small. Yet lay him in this stall. And from the Orient stars and wise men will travel to prevent the effect of Herod's generous doom, or general doom. What is this referring to? It's an allusion, historical allusion to the Nativity, where we usually see the wise men, although they came much later.
The slaughter of the innocents.
We're talking about the slaughter of the innocents, because Herod, who perceived from the wise men that the star signified a royal birth, he was jealous, and to prevent the possibility of his kingdom being usurped by another, he sent out an edict that all children under the age of 2 would be destroyed. And remember, the angel woke up Joseph in the night, and he fled with Mary into Egypt. And so Jesus' life was spared, but the doom was sealed on the lives of so many babies. Seest thou, my soul, with thy faith's eyes, how he which fills all place, yet none holds him, doth lie? Where is he lying? This immensity. Well, it begs the question, where was he lying? Was not his pity towards thee wondrous high, that would have need to be pitied by thee? Well, he was where? In exile, right? Kiss him, and with him into Egypt go, with his kind mother who partakes thy woe. He may be here because he's talked already about the effect of Herod's jealous general doom See thou, my soul, with thy faith's eyes, how he which fills all place yet none holds him doth lie. Immediately in the nativity, where's he lying?
Manger.
In a manger, in a food trough, right? With the animals surrounding him. And he contemplates here the pity of God, that is the compassion of God towards man, that would have made him to make himself so weak and then be received not in a court with kings, as Herbert suggested in Redemption in the poem we previously read, but by no one, that he would have to be born in a stable, in a barn, and laid in a manger. Was not his pity towards thee wondrous high, that would have need to be pitied by thee? Kiss him, and with him into Egypt go. That idea of kiss him.
Sarah Beth says it's a reference to Psalm
2.
It
is. It's in the imperative, and it's a reference to the psalm, kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, right? That psalm begins, why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? He's thinking about that psalm in reference to Herod's jealous general doom, the vanity of the world to try to overcome the work of God for man in Jesus Christ. The powers that be, that is the temporal powers of the world that set themselves in opposition against the work of God for man in space and time then, in the life of Christ. Kiss him, and with him into Egypt go, with his kind mother who partakes thy woe. I'll leave you to go and look up La Corona and read the rest of that sonnet cycle, which is just as lovely as these first two. But with these, I will tell you Merry Christmas and urge you to go and consider the immensity of God, that all which is always is all everywhere, which cannot sin and yet all sins must bear, which cannot die yet cannot choose but die. Lo, faithful virgin, yields himself to lie in prison in thy womb. And though he there can take no sin nor thou give, yet he will wear, taken from thence flesh, which death's force may try. So consider, as you look at the manger scene, the cross this year, a beautiful image.
Thank you, Mrs. A. And thank you everyone for coming today. We appreciate it. I'll put the recording up and the discussion post in the Google Classroom. And speaking for Mrs. A, wish you all a Merry Christmas. We will see you in the new year. And until then, happy reading.
Bye now.